Hey, I'm TheLoopyAlchemist, and it is good to be back. If I sound a bit different, it's because I'm using a different microphone and a different video editor, so hopefully that clears everything up. Also, before I start the video, I need to talk about something pretty serious. As you may have heard, there's been a devastating forest fire near Fort McMurray, Alberta, which is basically my backyard, and it has actually gotten so bad that the entire city has had to be evacuated. And currently, there are over 50,000 people who have been displaced. And even as we speak, the fire is still not under control. And unfortunately, due to the really warm and really dry weather we've been having, it doesn't look like it will be for the next little while. So, I'm going to leave a link in the description to the Canadian Red Cross, so if you guys have the means and feel like donating, that would really help out those people who have been displaced. Alright, well, thank you, and on to the video. Today I'm going to be examining Uriel Septim V's invasion of Akavir, and our information on it, or more appropriately, our lack thereof. I've already done a lore episode on this, but that was way back in the day before I really knew how to edit stuff and really don't have the understanding of the lore that I do now. So this is really more of a re-examination of it, and me kind of speculating, theorizing a bit, and again, just looking at the sources and what exactly can they tell us. We only have about 3 books we can actually rely on for Akavir, and we have one quest in Oblivion, but as I'll mention later on, that really just brings up more questions than answers, but it also begs one very, very interesting question when talking about Uriel Septim V's invasion, and a little conspiracy theory I have as to just why there is so little information on Akavir. Before I really delve into this, just a quick recap of what we actually do know about Akavir. Our best book on the subject, besides the report that I'll get into later on, the report being Akavir and the Disaster at Ionith, the Imperial one explaining just what all happened with Uriel Septim V's invasion, which in and of itself has a load of problems that I'll get into later. It states that there are 4 races in Akavir: the Kamal, who are snow demons, the Tzeki, who are vampiric snakes, the Tangmo, who are nice monkey people, and the Kabotung, which are Khajiits on steroids. Of course, the book Mysterious Akavir, we need to take it with a grain of salt. We don't know really anything about its author or when it was written, so really, how much can we take this at face value? But it's really the only thing we have, so we just kind of need to play with the cards we're dealt. We also have the Pocket Guide to the Empire, which has a couple paragraphs going over the history between Akavir and Tamriel, and both this and that one quest in Oblivion raise a number of really important questions. First and foremost is Akavir has had an absolutely massive impact on Tamriel. The Septim Dynasty actually uses that dragon symbol, which by the way is the logo on the Skyrim box, for their imperial seal. That comes from Akavir. The blades, they come from Akavir. There was even a brief period before the rise of the Septim Dynasty that it was actually an Akaviri minister ruling over all of Tamriel. And that's to say nothing of the couple times Tamriel has been invaded by Akavir. I actually did an episode on that too, but I'd take the information I give out in that one with a grain of salt. I haven't touched the Elder Scrolls Online, and a lot of that episode was speculation, so I'm really not sure how accurate it is now or how much has been filled in over the course of the Elder Scrolls Online. It's something I've got to do, but considering I haven't had the time to make videos, I really don't have the time to dump a lot of time into an MMO right now. So let me know in the comments if something interesting has come up in the Elder Scrolls Online about Akavir. But the point I want to make is, considering Tamriel has been invaded time after time, and there were actually Akavir ministers running the government, and that they've had such a massive cultural impact on Tamriel. Why is this place so mysterious? If all this stuff has happened, we should know a lot about it. And again, I'll talk about this more later on, but I think there's a reason for that. Alright, well, let's get into the actual invasion now. Uriel Septim V, he was a very successful military commander in Tamriel. In fact, he's usually described as being the single best general that the Empire ever produced, aside from Tiber Septim himself, which is really saying a lot. After getting everything in Tamriel in order, he invaded the islands in between Tamriel and Akavir. Most importantly is Ionith, which I think that's how you pronounce that, but come on, you guys know how I am with pronouncing Elder Scrolls names. We know what I'm talking about. That is the important thing. So that happened, and it went pretty well. The prince of the island, Prince Bashomon, which I think he's human, but we're never really told what race the guys living on these islands are, so who knows, they could be a type of elf. We don't know. I'm just going to guess human, but it could be almost anything. Speaking of which, this would actually be a great place to expand on for any future DLC, but bottom line, we know next to nothing about these little islands, other than that they got invaded by the Empire took them over, and then made a lot of upgrades to the harbor there, specifically at Black Harbor. Interestingly enough, we don't know if there's any Imperial forces on these islands today. We haven't heard anything about them, and again, keep this in mind because I have a conspiracy theory about this, but nothing else has been mentioned of them. But again, this will all get explained in my little conspiracy theory later on. Or well theorized. Whatever, you know what I'm talking about. So from there, Uriel Septim V spends 4 years sending reconnaissance expeditions into Akavir, which the report on the disaster at Ionith notes was good but clearly inadequate. And this is what really gets into the one problem I have with the report at the disaster at Ionith. It seems like it was written for a public audience to try and explain what all happened and why the disaster happened. Okay, well, clearly that's exactly what its intention was, but let me explain a bit further. Mainly, what I'm saying is that it was trying to absolve the Emperor of all responsibility and try to help the Empire maintain its dignity. I mean, even in the last couple paragraphs, it notes that it was doomed from the start, but there wasn't anything wrong with Uriel Septim V because, from what they knew at the time, the planning was sound, which, okay, fair enough, you could say that, but come on, when you're invading an entire new continent and lose 4 legions in the process, actually, take that with a grain of salt. I think it was only the 10th legion that was wiped out, along with Uriel Septim V in the retreat. We'll get into that a bit later on. But basically, an entire military disaster on that level. And yeah, it needs a bit more explaining. Another thing I really want to go into is that instead of sending reinforcements, they sent a bunch of civilian colonists into the imperial province of Akavir, which was very short-lived. And can you imagine how crappy it must have been being one of those colonists? We think most of them got out, but we really don't know. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's just briefly give a brief overview. I said brief twice, that sounded stupid, but whatever, of the invasion of Akavir and what happened. So Uriel Septim V and his legions invade. They first captured a small coastal town that they name Septemia, and then they go further inland and capture another abandoned city, which they rename Ionith. Ionith, it's surrounded by nice fields and everything, so they make that their capital. Then the legions proceed to build a road in between Ionith, the inland city, and Septemia, which is the port on the coast, and they build a string of forts in between along the road they built. And then, presumably, we have a bunch of citizens go out and create farms and whatnot, and maybe ranches in between. And it all seems nice and good for a bit. I'm guessing the land was pretty good there if they managed to get 4,000 people. 4,000, sorry, I don't know why I said the number 4,000, but basically a lot of it. I must have been thinking of the 4 legions they had in the expeditionary force. Sorry, can you tell I've not done a video for a while, because I'm all over the place, but please bear with me. Anyways, it's all good. But you have to keep in mind there's Tzeki cavalry, or scouts, keeping an eye on them at all times. Speaking of cavalry, the Empire didn't manage to get many of them over there due to limited space on the transports in between Tamriel and Akavir, so that was another problem. Also, we know next to nothing about the geography in Akavir, but we have to guess that there were a lot of waterways and maybe a lot of inland islands, maybe even something resembling the Great Lakes, because there is a passage in the report that notes that there weren't any trees, so the Imperial forces couldn't build small boats and take advantage of having naval forces in the area, which the Tzeki didn't seem to have. Alright, so the Imperial province of Akavir doesn't last for that long because there were extreme weather events, both on the continent itself, and the fleet got decimated when it was to Black Harbor. So don't really know what they mean by extreme weather, but I'm guessing killer hail, killer storms, just a bunch of nasty stuff. In fact, so bad, it led the Imperial report to speculate that the Tzeki can control the weather. For the winter, well, everyone's sort of hunkered down. The fleet can't move. It's back at Black Harbor. Uriel Septim, the 5th, and his legions are just hanging around Ionith. We have reports that a bunch of the forts in between Septimia and Ionith fall to the Tzeki, and presumably any farms that those poor colonists went out to build, I'm guessing they had to have gotten raided too, and I'm guessing the casualty rate for that was basically if the Tzeki get you, it is not pretty. We then have an embassy coming into Ionith, allegedly trying to make peace offers, but they proceed to attempt to assassinate Uriel Septim V, and at that point it's just total war. Things go from bad to worse, and at this point, at Ionith, we only have battle mages sort of communicating with each other, but the messages are garbled because of, I don't know, magic. Again, probably the Tzeki interfering with them. We know next to nothing, but the Emperor ends up trying to break out of Ionith and head back to Septimia, because things are just terrible at this point. They're cutting their losses. They just want to get out of there alive. But that doesn't work out because they're cornered, and Uriel Septim V and his entire legion, the 10th, are cut down, except 2 survivors who managed to escape during the Tzeki's victory party and make it back to Septimia. But the Tzeki aren't that far behind them. They launch a savage assault on Septimia, which is only stopped because the fleet, which had been sent over after a desperate message from the battle mages, even though it went through horrible weather conditions, it ends up showing up at the last minute, and it drives off the Tzeki. They get everyone on board, completely evacuate Septimia, all the army, all the remaining colonists, and then they head back to Black Harbor. And at that point, the Empire is in pure damage control mode. Okay, so on to this conspiracy theory that I have spent so much time talking about. My conspiracy theory is that after all the contact that has happened between Tamriel and Akavir over the years, the fact that we know next to nothing about these islands in between Tamriel and Akavir, specifically Black Harbor, given that it got a massive upgrade to its port, one that was capable of launching an entire fleet over to Akavir, the fact that we have no mention of a present Imperial fleet, and most of all is after 4 years of sending reconnaissance missions and scouts to Akavir, and keep in mind we had thousands of legionnaires and civilians head over, and even though an entire army was destroyed along with most of the expeditionary force, still a lot of people got out of there alive, and it seems absolutely inconceivable to me that the 2 legionnaires who did get out wouldn't have been questioned extensively, that there wouldn't have been detailed reports on this. The fact that next to nothing at all is known, and I have to imagine that the College of Mages or whatever would have had a load of researchers over there as well too. And you can say a couple things, given that a large portion of the fleet was destroyed and a lot of people were killed, presumably a lot of experts too. It sort of makes sense that there wouldn't be that much info, but there would have still had to be a ton of stuff that survived. There would have had to be lots of reports and lots of memoirs and just people talking. So here's the conspiracy theory I have. We actually know a lot about Akavir, but it's all classified. It's all kept secret somewhere in the Imperial City, or somewhere maybe even guarded by the Moth Priests, or the remnants of the Blades, or something, but it's written down somewhere and it's kept secret because Akavir is so dangerous. And as for the islands in between, specifically Ionith with Black Harbor, I'm guessing there's still an Imperial force there acting as kind of like a beacon or early warning system to make sure that Tamriel doesn't get invaded by Akavir again, or even just keeping an eye on Akavir. Now, there are a couple holes with this, mostly if there's still a large military force built up there. What was that doing during the war with the Eldmeri Dominion that almost brings down the Empire, and the one that causes the civil war in Skyrim in between the Stormcloaks and the Imperials? And I really don't have an answer. Who knows? Maybe the Imperial army that I'm guessing is still stationed on the islands in between went rogue. Maybe it's its own little kingdom now with a bunch of legions that elevated their commander to king of the island. Bottom line, I don't know. At this point, I'm just speculating. But to conclude, I'm guessing that somewhere in the Empire, there's some secret group that knows a lot about Akavir, and they're just sitting on a mountain of info. And I'm guessing there might even be regular contact and a group assigned to deal with this. But anyways, these are just my thoughts. Be sure to let me know yours. I realize with my conspiracy theory, it's probably not 100% correct, but I think there has to be a kernel of truth in there somewhere. I think the Empire has to know something that they're covering up, and there has to be something that they did about it or put in place. I mean, you don't just lose an entire army and just sort of run away. You have to have something in place to make sure that you yourself are not going to get invaded. So thank you guys, I'm the Loopy Alchemist, and I'll see you guys later.